All right, people, let's do this one last time. I thought I was the one and only Spider-Man.
Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animated features not made by Disney. I'm your host, Octaviano Macias, and today I'm joined by a guest host. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jesus Quinteras. I used to work with Octaviano at Walmart, almost 6 years ago now?
It feels like it.
It's not longer.
It's been long, honestly. It's crazy. Like every time I think I'm gonna get out of that place, something drags me back in. Like I don't know. I feel like I'm cursed at this point. But yeah, it's crazy.
No, I feel you. But yeah, like I said, lifelong comic reader, fantasy nerd, and just all around
right
geek in general.
Yeah, which is why we're talking about the animated movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse today, which is, of course, one of the few animated comic book movies that actually hit theaters, and surprisingly, one of the few non-Disney animated features to actually win an Oscar for Best Animated Picture, which to this day still kind of blows my mind that they created that award, and within the 20 years since, there's like maybe 6 movies not made by them that are winners. So
no, it's a crazy stat to think about because going back to Disney's founding, all the way back in the 1930s and even further back, animation's always been the thing. It's not until the last 20 odd years we've had more of a focus on actual like live action features.
Yeah,
especially within the last decade or so. But yeah, I mean, like this is a studio that was known for so many years for their amazing animated features, and the first one to ever win was Snow White.
Yeah,
which was like their big hit. But yeah, this Spider-Verse honestly for me ticks a lot of boxes because it amazing story, great cast. Another big thing for me always with movies like that is the score, which this thing they knocked it out of the park on all fronts. This is one of those rare movies where I really don't have any issues with it. Like there's nothing for me to be nitpicky about it because it's just a little slow at the beginning because a little slow at the beginning, but what movie isn't?
Right.
And of course, but other than that, it's more or less perfect, period. I mean,
No, I get you. I mean, when it comes to Spider-Man, I like, of course, I rewatched this just to kind of get an idea of like, okay, get it fresh.
Exactly. Same here, because it's been a minute.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's just amazing how much this movie gets right, where it could have gone wrong, because with it being like a multiverse movie, like not to insult like the recent Spider-Man, because of course we had like the new Spider-Man live action movie that did the multiverse thing too. But between the two of them, where I think this one gets it a little more right is that everything is in service to the story. Whereas with the new one, No Way Home, it's like, okay, we're gonna bring in the Tobey Maguire, the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, and yeah, it's fine for the story, and I got no real issues on that. But at the same time, that a lot of that is just for the fan service, which is not necessarily bad, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, if you have no connection to those characters or those versions, it might not hit you as hard. Whereas with this one, the fact that it's doing the multiverse and it's like, okay, here's a bunch of characters, some of which have actually been in the comics before, like Spider-Man Noir. Whether you
Spider-Ham.
Yeah, exactly. Like whether you've read those versions or not, it's not going to affect your enjoyment of this movie, which I just love, and it's just an artistic delight on that as well, just because they do emphasize like, okay, these characters had their own art styles in the comics, so here we kind of play around with it a little bit more. Spider-Ham is like an old school cartoon. You got
Batman Noir, who kind of harkens back to like to the comic strips of the 30s, just in look and feel and tone.
Right.
And then you got Spider-Gwen, who's like more of the more recent.
Yeah, like the more modern. Then of course you got like the Japanese girl who's like done more like an anime. I know she's apparently a more recent creation. I've never actually seen her before this, but apparently she was in the comics.
Exactly same. And what's actually funny, jumping back real quick, is
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what I know about this, I've kind of know more or less the same about most of these characters. But what's funny is a lot of people actually assumed Peter Porker, Spider-Ham's origin was from the Simpsons movie.
Oh yeah. Because there's a lot of people who I remember that they thought that it was actually a Simpsons joke. And I'm like, oh no, there's an actual Spider-Ham. Like, granted, it's a little different than what we see in the movie, but it's not
more or less
off.
the same. Exactly. Yeah. Which, I mean, if they had gone with that origin for Peter Porker, I would not have been mad, because it's one of the highlights of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, with me, like, when I saw the trailers for this movie, of course, it was like, okay, how many Spider people are gonna be popping up in this? The second he popped up, I was like, you know what, I'm completely sold on this. Like, granted, I love Spider-Man, but I just have a lot of nostalgia for like old school cartoons and talking animals. So I'm like, mixing those two is just perfect.
No, exactly. He definitely gives off like that Porky Pig vibe. Yeah. And the fact that he's voiced by John Mulvaney just
takes it to another level.
Which I gotta say, he doesn't have a lot of lines, but he delivers them like with such great timing. It works, like, especially when when they're in Miles's dorm room, and he's like, "Oh, do animals talk in this universe? Because I don't want to freak them out."
Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, supposedly they're planning on doing a spinoff on him. I don't know how true that. I mean, how much they're actually working on that, because they've been saying
exactly, because
we've been doing like all Spider-Man.
Yeah, because they have the other across the two-part sequels, across the Spider-Verse in production right now.
Yeah,
they've been talking about, but I read something similar where there are some other like Spider-Verse spin-offs they're looking at, such as I guess a Spider-Gwen one. If they end up doing a Spider-Ham spin-off, I most definitely want to buy a ticket just to see what they do, just because of all the possible spoofs they can do on all the different characters.
The comics, there's of course a bunch of different animal characters that come along with Spider-Ham. Like there's our Iron Mouse, the Iron Man mouse, and then one of the weirdest ones to me
the Beyonder.
Like they even had at one point a Black Panther animal counterpart, but instead of it being Black Panther, it was Black Panda, which I'm like, well, he already has an animal in his name. Why did you just keep it as that?
Exactly.
But I guess the pun was what needed to happen.
I mean, it works. So
yeah, I mean, it's great. It's just silly.
Exactly. But and then going back to Spider-Verse, it definitely was, like you mentioned earlier, something that it's great that they got a lot right, but it could have gone so wrong, especially the animation style, which, if you consider at that time, was very experimental. Still kind of crazy to think about that. We've had animated, superhero movies, cartoons, all this for years, and no one ever thought, well, what if we made it look like a comic? Because you figure comic books and TV are probably two of the most popular serialized formats in media. Those two things should be more or less work together. But again, the only time they decided to do this, it completely changed up everything, because you're immediately, literally right from the opening, you see the Sony logo, you zoom in and you see that layer treatment that they use in comics, like with the
dots,
the dots with the color, exactly. And even in the promotional material, you saw that as well.
It's crazy.
Like, there was such a big swing for the fence. They had no way of knowing, is this going to work? And I kind of applaud them for that, because had they gone the traditional animated or CGI route, would that have affected, probably changed the overall way most people feel about it? Probably not, but I think visually it would have been as memorable
as this is. Yeah, which
exactly.
Like when I first saw this, I actually was lucky enough to have seen it in a screening with the directors, because there's 3 directors on this. And some of the people who worked on it, like Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who most people know for like the Lego Movie. And I remember like they mentioned that it was very hard for them to actually do this stuff, because it was the kind of stuff that on a computer would have been pushing it to its limits. But
Exactly.
Sony was thankfully supportive of them. They never specify why exactly, but they mentioned like they were just kind of going for it, which this is just me
Again,
theorizing.
exactly. You don't really hear about that nowadays from a major studio, just jumping full on in
Yeah, like
on a
from me,
project like this.
like for me, my theories on why they might have done it is because one, with it being Spider-Man, it's like the big thing that Sony owns. And no
Exactly.
offense to Sony, but they really don't have that many hits. And the other thing was, which is why some people were kind of worried about this. This was coming out after, like, I believe the Emoji movie from Sony, so it was kind of like, well, that was a really shitty movie. So going from that to
Yeah,
this,
the
um,
emoji movie. I know a lot of people have called that like basically essentially a knockoff of Wreck-It Ralph, which it more or less is.
yeah, it's not a very good movie. I don't think it's as bad as people have given it its reputation as. Like
I
it's
mean, it's not. I, it's just a movie like it suffers from the fact that yeah, it's another heavily CGI animated movie. The story is kind of meh,
yeah,
and again, watching that, you're immediately drawn, of course, to comparisons to Wreck-It Ralph, which you know
right,
itself just sort of blew everything out of the water.
yeah. I
And not
mean,
only that, but I think Sony at the time too was also getting a couple of years ago. What was this? Because what Spider-Verse came out 2018,
yeah, 2018.
2018. I think Emoji Movie came out about a year or so before that.
Yeah, like it was 2017 or
Yeah,
so. I'm not
so
too sure, but I
so you
know
figure
that
the two,
like I know that it
you figure the
was
two,
before.
right? And you figure the two big. So yeah, that was exactly that was a lot of pressure on them because of the Emoji Movie. You figure before the year before that, 2016, they had released not an animated movie necessarily, but the Ghostbusters, the all-female Ghostbusters, was just got reamed. So they needed a hit bad.
Yeah. So I'm like, I must, of course I could be wrong. It could be any other thing, but my general theory on why they might have allowed them to do all this stuff, even though this is the kind of thing that most studios wouldn't, is because they're pretty much had a bunch of failures, a pretty bad reputation, on the animation side.
Oh yeah.
So it was one of those things like, look, just do whatever you want. Hopefully, whatever you do hits. And thankfully, it did hit. It's just a perfect example of just letting the artists do what they do best. Because like it's like the art style in this is special because it feels like they're trying to recreate the comic book look, but instead of it just being like, okay, they drew it out with it being CG, they're allowed to experiment with different art styles to a point that it feels like a celebration of comics and animation.
No, exactly. Yeah. And on the production side of it too, I think when they pitched this to Sony, their initial treatment, which was like a combination of animatics and storyboard,
Right.
was initially 2 hours, which is insane to think like for a pitch for an animated movie because it's usually just a short little animatic or like a handful of storyboards. The fact that the directors, the writers, they went in and pitched like essentially a movie in itself as the pitch and just got that green light. That's still insane to think about nowadays.
Yeah.
Because like you said, a lot of studios nowadays, it more or less depends on who's in charge.
Right.
But yeah, they're not all that hesitant to try, to experiment with new ideas. They want to go with what's worked in the past. That's why we keep getting, not to bash them, DC, why they're now reworking their whole cinematic universe because it just doesn't. It didn't work for one reason or another. They gave it to, not that it didn't work. It just they were trying to play catch up and they forced a shortcut.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things like on DC where they either should have given it more time to build up to it, or what I've kind of liked from the more recent stuff, like whether it's Shazam or the Suicide Squad, where it's just like, okay, look, we're still going to be doing that universe thing, but that's really more on the back burner. It's just something to kind of give you an idea of what this world is. People already know Superman, Batman, and all those guys, so we kind of don't need to waste too much time explaining them. Let's just explore this specific story first before we even think about doing a team up.
Exactly, which is where they kind of shot themselves in the foot, because you figure they've had, arguably, I would say, between the two companies, you could make a case for certain characters, depending on the years or decades being more popular than the other. But for the most part, the trinity of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman.
Yeah, they're iconic.
Up here, that's the A1. That is the mascot for DC.
Like with Wonder Woman, even though she only got her movie like 5 years ago, like first full length.
It's still the best one, hands down, of those initial movies.
Yeah, but like even with having taken that long just for her to get one movie, she's still a very well-known character, because of course there was the old show, and whenever people think about a female superhero, the first one that comes to mind is always Wonder Woman. So with that iconicness, I mean, you would kind of think that, okay,
you would have assumed there would have been something more in those intervening years. Which I'm going to say is not, which again, working back to Spider-Verse, I think for them, not to say that it wouldn't have worked, not that it couldn't have worked with Peter or one of these other ones introduced, but the fact that they went with Miles, and it just took off. I mean, he's been around for a long time. He's been a popular character. Have there been instances where he's like every other character, where his popularity sort of waxed and waned? Of course, no character is ever able to maintain a high level of popularity for a period of time. There's always going to be dips in that.
Yeah, I mean, with Miles being the one that they chose to start, because I've heard that people say, like, okay, they could have gone with anyone. Why did they go with Miles? It came down to pretty much one of all the different Spider-Men that there's been. He's the only one that kind of has that story baked into his, where it's like, okay, the original Spider-Man dies, so now he becomes Spider-Man.
Exactly.
And I feel like it works with what the movie's theme is going for, in terms of like anyone could be Spider-Man. Because if they had gone with, like, let's just say, like another Peter Parker who was just younger and then crossed over into all this stuff, it wouldn't have had that same effect, because it's like, well, we know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. We've seen Peter Parker be Spider-Man. So seeing this young kid who isn't Peter Parker become the Spider-Man, that's that whole thing of anyone can be under that mask. So
exactly,
I really love that they went with that choice instead of copying out with, let's just do Peter Parker, because that would be the safe bet.
No, exactly. I mean, it was a big risk. They stuck, but the writers, the directors, they built a connection to Miles, and it's a good thing that they stuck with it, because now he's arguably one of Marvel's most popular characters now.
Oh yeah.
And not only that, but again, going back to the look that they gave with, he already had an iconic look, because it's the black and red suit, which even regardless of how you see it, whether it's in a comic book, an animated movie, or even the video game that Sony came out with a couple of years ago, it always looks good. It's just such a refreshing take, and it's just a simple change of color, going from red, white, and blue to black and red.
While watching the movie, I like how they kind of set that up in terms of the suit, because you have like the early bit where he buys like the Spider-Man costume, and you have Stan Lee, who, of course, this was one of his final performances, probably his final performance before
Endgame.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like in terms of when he passed away. I'm not sure if this came out before or after. I'm not sure if you remember, like when he passed away exactly.
Off the top of my head, I do not, but I know he did do a lot of work to record all these different cameos beforehand. Because I think I'm sure at that point he knew, okay, like this is coming up. I need to I want to do this just to kind of get these out there. That way they're already ready to go. And then going to the Stan Lee cameo, I like that they did a little bit more.
Oh yeah,
they didn't just. It's not like exactly, but it's not a blink you'll miss it moment like it has been with so many of his other appearances. He actually was there, had a full conversation with Miles, and he pops up a couple more times throughout the film. You just got to be a little more eagle-eyed to find it, but it was a nice little send-off, to Stan, because again, he's such a big part in the creation of
Spider-Man, which
Marvel, Spider-Man, Thor, just Marvel in general. Yeah, they had to give him a proper send-off.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I just remembered. Yeah, so this movie did actually release like about a couple of weeks before, after he passed away, because I remember watching it. They actually mentioned like, oh yeah, we had to quickly add in like a little in memory of Stanley and Steve Ditko, who had also passed away that year.
Passed away like around that same time. Yeah.
So it was crazy. But what I was trying to get at with that is that you have that whole scene where he's basically selling it, and it's kind of like a little joke because it's like, oh, there's no refunds and the suit doesn't fit. But then you start thinking about it, it's like, oh, okay, so it's actually the movie kind of foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing, okay, exactly.
Like, yeah, this suit is not the right fit for him because it's not his suit. He has to create his own. So that's kind of neat.
No, yeah, and the fact that again that they give that one. I was just saying, I love that little scene. Just to jump back real quick, I love that scene with Sour. He's just like, oh yeah, it'll fit. It always fits. Trust me. And he's got that, that devilish smirk on his face, like. And he just winks over to the sign, like, you're gonna take the suit. So it's such a small little thing, but it just works so well because you can visualize like Stanley actually telling that to somebody.
Yeah, that was actually a really nice touch.
But like I said, there's a lot of other things in this too. Like I said, the fact that like you mentioned, the fact that he's out there doing his own thing, he makes it himself, which again is probably one of the best moments in there, where we finally see him come into his own, step up to the mirror, he fills in the suit, but he doesn't just put on that his universe is Peter's suit. He decides, you know what, I gotta do a little bit extra, which is why I like that they gave him that artistic side.
Yeah,
that he didn't just take what was already there. He wanted to make it his own.
Yeah, like I've seen some people interpret this movie as, aside from it being a Spider-Man love letter, as kind of like a metaphor for being an artist, because you have Miles constantly throwing up his art and kind of struggling to find his place in the world. So it's kind of like an artist trying to figure out what they, who they are, what they can do, and how they can stand out there. I'm not sure how well that entirely holds up, but I could kind of see where people who have that whole I guess theory on that
side. Right.
can say that about it, because it's kind of like that whole thing where it's like, oh, the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man is supposed to be a metaphor for going through puberty. I'm like,
well, I mean,
okay,
you could make a good argument. Spider-Man more or less is a coming of age story, regardless of whether it's Toby, Andrew, Tom, or what's the act, Shamik Moore, who does the voice of Miles. It's Spider-Man at its core, regardless of who it is, whether it's Peter, Miles, Gwen, Miguel. It's always been a coming of age story. You have a kid who, is trying to find their place, in the world, and really sure how are they going to do it or what they want to do, and then by circumstance, they have something that, in the words of Miles, it just happens. Whether right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, however you want to interpret it, that change is thrust upon them, and they have to either. Well, no, we know that they end up meeting that, but like I said, it's always been that. I've always seen it more as a coming of age thing, and then they've thrown in, like, especially with Spider-Verse, they threw in a little bit of what was Great Expectations in there as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to talk about before I forget,
right.
With the whole thing being a multiverse story, one of the things I really do love is that upon rewatches, you actually start noticing a lot of stuff that you would normally write off in other stuff as just, okay, they're just trying to avoid using the actual names of stuff. Right. But as you watch it, it starts to feel like, okay, maybe it's just them trying to emphasize that, yes, this is a different universe, because it goes from little things like, okay, instead of FedEx, they have a company named RedX.
Yeah.
Instead of like
Or
bridesmaids, you see a poster of I think it was like baby showers or something like that, but it's like the exact same style.
but just
Well,
different
exactly. Like it,
in a slight way.
yeah,
Because I
like
think they do the same at the beginning too when we get you know, the Chris Pine voiced Peter Parker. You see an ad. We know it's Coca-Cola, but it's
yeah,
called Coca Soda or something like that.
yeah, it was something like
Uh,
that.
yeah, and then there's like different variations on all the Sony products. It's either spelled Soni or Soniie or or to some variation of that.
Yeah, and like one
Yeah,
of the
and it
ways
is
they,
those little things that just kind of makes it when you do see it like, oh, that's interesting.
yeah, because like at some point, like one of the things I noticed, like early on when you see one of Mouse's papers, when you see like the date on it, it says like February, December or something like that. Like it's not even a real month. So it's like they even went the extra mile by even putting in like, okay, they
To
have
change,
different names for the months and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know, that's kind of impressive. Like the fact that they went with that much on little details.
no, exactly. And one of going back to the little details too, it's something I didn't notice the first couple watch throughs of Spider-Verse, but the scene where they are where Kingpin and all of them are testing the collider for the first time, they meant I think it was Doctor Octopus, one of the other scientists mentioned, oh, we have like 5 separate universes opening. If you notice close enough, next to each of those universes where those openings are at, it's the respective universes for the Spider-Man.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. So and according to that, which makes it funnier that Jake Johnson's Peter B. Parker is the Spider-Man from the main Marvel universe.
Yeah, I noticed that, which it's a great touch, especially because it just makes it feel like it's that much more connected to the comics, even when it's
Exactly.
clearly not. And of course, I just love that Jake Johnson plays them as like this completely washed up Spider-Man who's still technically doing it right, but at the same time,
Isn't quite
as everyone knows with Spider-Man,
exactly.
when Spider-Man's doing well, Peter Parker's life is taking a big shit.
Exactly. But this is the inverse where both of his lives are
Just crap.
completely imploded. Exactly. I love when they were pitching it to Jake Johnson to do the voice. They told him, oh yeah, it's basically Mr. Miyagi. He'll be the Mr. Miyagi to Miles' Daniel LaRusso, but this Mr. Miyagi doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Which makes sense considering that, when it comes to Spider-Man, it's like you have to remember this is a guy who is constantly messing up, has never actually had kids of his own, and of course, with the Miles story, by that point, technically Peter Parker is dead. So how is this guy going to be teaching another person how to be Spider-Man when he's pretty much struggled with it himself?
No, exactly. And then the other thing too is this is the most experience of the Spider-Man because he is. I think they mentioned he's like 36 or whatever or however old he is
Yeah.
in there, but yeah, he's the most experienced of all of the Spider-Man, arguably. What I also picked up too is he's going into, especially with the fight scenes, he looks like he's like so being Spider-Man. Like, again, going there with the comparison where you've got Miles who's just like, oh my God, I'm a spider person. Like I have all these powers. And he's like, yeah, okay, so do I.
Yeah, like he's just definitely tired
He's
of.
so over it.
I mean, it's to a point where
He's
they added into the story where he's constantly referring to things by different things, like, okay, this is a goober.
like,
Uh, him pointing out like, okay, this is what Kingpin's gonna say at this moment. It's just like, okay, he's been through this enough where it's like this is just routine at this point.
exactly. And it adds another element to this movie where it starts out as like coming of age story, and then
Right.
when Miles meets Peter B, it becomes more of a buddy cop film where you've got like the old grizzled cop who just is like, oh, I'm like 2 weeks from retirement. He's just so close, so over it. And then you've got the energetic recruit Miles who's just like ready to go, wants to do everything. I think the moment that encapsulates that the most is when they're about to break into Alchemax. You
Yeah.
got Miles. They have like their superhero moment where they're posing, with their hands on their hips, all that. You got Miles wearing the cape. It's such a little kid thing to do. You have a costume, like, oh, let me just tie something around me. He's like, I think it looks cool.
Think about like that whole scene where you're trying to get the computer.
Oh
And again, it's like one of those things that I really love about this movie is it's like, yeah, you just got to pay attention to it. It's not even just for like, comic book nerd reasons where it's like, okay, we got to, find the little references or whatever. It's like, no, you can see characters doing random things like when you see like the scientists noticing like, oh, look, they're walking through here with Peter B. Parker taking the bagel or whatnot. Aside from someone pointing out like, hey, that guy stole our bagels, you also notice that while everyone is getting ready to, shoot at them, there's at least one scientist right there who's kind of like, I was on my lunch. Come on. Like, just giving that reaction. So it's just
like any normal person would have.
Yeah, it's like, really, these guys are just have to break in. So I love that you can find little things, like that. Like, it doesn't even have to be comic book references. It's just everyday life.
Little thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
Another good moment like that too is when after the whole sequence where Miles and Peter B are hanging from the fucking train.
Yeah.
Where they finally just land in the middle of the sidewalk. He's like, hey, do you guys go around? No? Okay. Thanks, me.
Yeah.
Because it just shows, like, all right, these people, like, okay, whatever. I'm just gonna go about my daily business, which most people tend to do. They just keep going, keep focusing on what we gotta do.
Yeah, such a great touch in the movie, and of course, one of the things that I really do love is how even if you're aware of the comics, it still plays off a lot of this stuff in a way that will still be kind of a like not a full on surprise, but at least will be effective for people who know this stuff. Like, of course, there's a whole reveal with Miles' uncle being a bad guy, and it's one of those things where it's like, if you're a fan of the comics, you already know that was coming.
Exactly.
But the way they do it is so well.
No, it wasn't. They did kind of do it. I'm glad you brought up
yeah,
Aaron Davis, or the Prowler, however people know him. But the fact that they got Mahershala Ali to do the voice for Aaron, first of all, he is such an underrated actor, especially before he won his Oscar for Moonlight. Because him voicing Uncle Aaron in Spider-Verse, him being Cottonmouth on, I think it was the first season of Luke Cage. And then, of course, you see him in anything else he does. He is an incredible actor. Like, I loved his take on Uncle Aaron, because they did kind of hint at the beginning, especially when he, was able to clear over the fence and take Miles to the spot. Like, well, it kind of drops into your head, like, okay, well, how does he know about this place? How is he able to do that? And then, of course, it was that reveal of him as the Prowler was just, because even like knowing who he was, who they were going to be able to be, the first time I remember watching, it was still so well executed. I even found myself like
oh shit,
like a surprise. Exactly, because it was, and again, that's another good thing about a movie that's always is that if it's good enough that it can suck you in, even if you know what's going to happen, that's able to draw you that much further in, like where you're even surprised by stuff that Like, that's a great thing for a movie to be able to do, especially for people, I guess, that kind of know who these characters are, when this reveal is going to happen, more or less, that it catches you off guard and you're kind of surprised. Kudos to the writers. Kudos to the writers. Kudos to Mahershala Ali for his performance, because I really hope that for whoever they end up getting to play Uncle Aaron, if and when we get a live action Miles, because that's going to be a tough comparison. Which technically I think they already have introduced Aaron Davis in the MCU.
They did. Most people kind of forget about it. It was just a small role, but he was played by
what was
Shoot,
his name? He
the
was on
guy who's
Community. I know that.
I mean, I know he's known as Childish Gambino.
Donald Glover.
Yeah, so he pops up. I mean, it's a cute little reference because I know part of the reason why we have the character of Miles is because Donald Glover wanted
to play. He wanted to play Miles. I think in an episode of well, it wasn't even for Miles initially. I remember there was an episode of Community where he wears like a Spider-Man suit or a Spider-Man pajama or something to that effect, and people saw that, and it was around the time that The Amazing Spider-Man was going into production. They wanted to get him cast as Peter, but that ended up getting inspired. His look ended up inspiring the overall, like the artistic representation of Miles that I think it was Bendis did a couple years later when they introduced the character in the Ultimates. I mean, whether or not he comes back to play Claire in a future Miles MCU movie, or if they get somebody else, it's still a tough comparison because
especially
that reveal was almost Vader-esque.
Yeah, I mean, it's
still people that didn't know,
and of course, with it now being something that people will look at, it's also going to be even harder when you consider that if they try pulling off a similar twist of, oh, he's actually a bad guy, it's like, I mean, well, there's a lot of people who have this version. It's kind of like doing the Darth Vader twist now.
Exactly. Whether they do this, whenever, a year, I'm sorry, not a year. 3 or however many years into the future, whenever they decide to finally bring Miles to live action, it's going to be a tough one because they're more or less going to have to follow the model that they did for Peter, for Tom Holland's Peter.
Yeah.
Where they just have to try and, no, this is what it's been, and just go with it.
It's definitely going to be a tough act to follow, which, thinking about that.
And especially with the other characters in Miles' life, too, like his parents, Jefferson Davis and Rio Morales. Brian, I think he was in the Eternals.
Yeah, also, Brian Tyree Henry.
There you go.
Yeah,
love him as the voice of Jefferson Davis. Rio Morales is voice actor, who I feel so bad that I can't remember her name. She, in the few little instances she's in there, she does have some very impactful, mother to son moments with him.
Yeah, Luna Lauren Velez. That's who that is. There you go. I knew holding on to this was gonna work out. Yeah, she does really good. I just love that in the case of the father, they do give him a lot of little moments to flesh out his character without delving too much, like
into him and Aaron's past.
Yeah, like Miles asks the father, like, do you really hate Spider-Man? And just like the little reaction he gives tells you more than if he had just exactly. So it's just nice,
especially when we're she tries to skull and you know how I feel about him, baby, come on.
And I mean, I just want to give a shout out to one little thing. If anyone has this on Blu-ray, I'm not sure if it was in the DVD copy of it, but I know for sure it's in the Blu-ray copy of it. One thing that's definitely worth checking out if you have that is they have an alternate universe mode or something like that, where they actually put in all the deleted scenes in the movie, so you kind of get an idea of okay, this is how this deleted scene would have played out in this movie. I saw it once. It's definitely something where I wouldn't really watch again and again because there are deleted scenes, so it kind of slows down the movie and you can see why certain stuff was cut out, but it's still just a nice feature because most movies, when they have their deleted scenes, it's always walled off, which is fine. I get it. But just seeing a movie have it placed in, okay, now we have this deleted scene, see how this would have been like if we had kept it in. They actually were originally planning to have Miles have more of a relationship with his roommate in the movie.
Yankee Lee.
Who is a bigger character in the comics.
Oh, a huge character. He's Miles' guy in the chair, especially for the people who've played the Miles Morales expansion, the Marvel. I from the Marvel Spider-Man game, he has a huge role
Yeah.
in that. And initially, I think the reason why, because I think they already cast a voice actor for him when they were going into production, and the reason why they ended up changing it was because Genki and Ned from Spider-Man: Homecoming have so much in common.
Yeah.
They ended up I think there's a lot of crossover between those two characters, which is understandable, but again, it's still kind of disappointing that. Which again, this is the first movie in this planned trilogy, so I'm sure we're going to see more of Genki. But I do like the nod at the end of the movie where they show them finally starting to open up more, because at that point they've had some very awkward interactions with each other. Whether it was him passing out because he hears Spider-Ham talking, or the whole oh my god, I think it hit puberty.
Yeah, and he reacts to it.
Stops what he's doing. Like, what the hell did you just say?
yeah, that's definitely a version to seek out if you have the Blu-ray. It's just a neat little feature. Again, not one that I really watch again and again, because of course with the deleted scenes you can see automatically, okay, this is why they cut that out. It just drags on, but it's still like, if you're a fan of behind the scenes stuff, it's just a neat little feature to have and to understand how this movie would have been like if they had kept those scenes.
Right. But and sometimes those deleted scenes end up working out better than they had. They just end up cutting it for runtime issues or whatever reason.
Yeah. Regarding the upcoming sequels, because of course they're announced that they're doing two more.
Two-parter.
Exactly. I'm wondering whether or not they're bringing back all the characters, or it's just going to be like, okay, aside from Gwen, we're going to see just a bunch of new characters. Either way, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I kind of want to see these characters back just because I love them so much. Like, even if we don't get a lot of like the latter three characters, which would be Spider-Ham, Spider-Man Noir, and Penny Parker, I still really enjoy their moments in the movie, so I would like to see more. But if they decide, okay, let's just do a bunch of new ones,
focus on these other, exactly. No,
I'd be fine with it.
Exactly, it won't be the bad choice. It's just going to be something different, because we know for a fact that Spider-Man 2099's Miguel O'Hara
definitely
is going to be one of them. Yeah, he's going to be one of the main characters. They're also bringing in, I believe it's the voice of character, this an animated version of his character. It's the Japanese Spider-Man.
Yeah, I mean, they've been joking around with it. I mean, I'm hoping they'll deliver on that, but that they might bring in like the Japanese one,
the original actor to voice him. I know, not for this, obviously, unfortunately not for this one, because the actor has already passed away. But the original voice actor from the '60s, Spider-Man.
Oh yeah.
Wasn't supposed to appear in Spider-Verse, but I guess they ended up having him voiced by a different actor for whatever reason.
Right. I mean,
and then of course there are still rumors going around that we're going to see, if not Toby and Andrew, but at least again Tom Holland's Peter in this one. In Across the Spider-Verse. Which,
I don't know, I'm fine with that, but I kind of hope that it's not in that big of a role. Like, nothing against Tom Holland, I really do enjoy his Spider-Man. Right. It's just I don't want it to turn into just them trying to, like, okay, let's try to get everyone
open up the multiverse for the sake of the multiverse.
Exactly. Like, if you want to have him for a cameo, that'd be perfectly fine. But
no, exactly. Which I think is something they're probably more going to lean to, because if they are, so then, because we still do have the sequel coming out. Who knows when? Which, if that's the case, maybe kind of, if you want to have them have a little bit more screen time, save that for that movie. Don't just throw them out there just for the sake of throwing it out there.
I don't know. I'm at the very least hoping that they do kind of explore upon like the more obscure stuff. Kind of like, because I know that the Spider-Verse had its own comic storyline. It's vastly different from this movie. Right. But they included stuff like, okay, here's like the old Stanley newspaper comics. Here's like the like, what did they call it? Like the Hostess fruit bar or whatever, Spider-Man. So like they had their fun,
Right.
including a bunch of different universes. They even
Yeah,
had like the Marvel versus Capcom one, so that was kind of funny.
that's right. Well, like I said, the one thing I do stuff like so whether it's in I'm not sure if we're gonna get it in Across the Spider-Verse 2. Hopefully in we get it in Across the Spider-Verse part uh in the third Spider-Verse movie, but they have to at some point bring in the 90s Spider-Man voice actor.
Yeah, that's definitely one that they need to
Like
bring
that
in.
has to happen. Like you cannot, like I said, whether it's a cameo in Across the Spider-Verse Part One or they have him as an actual character in Across the Spider-Verse Part Two, they have to bring him in at some point. Like you can't do. It would just be such a disservice
Yeah,
to
like
not have
even
him.
if yeah, exactly. I mean, even if because I know some people don't really like that version. I don't get
Well, I
why,
mean, like
but
it depends exactly because it's if you grew. It's one of those things where if you grew up watching it, you do have an attachment to that. It's the same thing with the other Marvel shows from then, whether it's,
yeah,
the X-Men, Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, whatever. You do have those attachments because that's what we grew up watching. So, like I said, it's something that I'm sure they probably thought of, like, okay, well, how can we work him in and what makes the most sense? And of course, the main thing comes down to whether or not he wants to do it.
yeah. I mean, with me, it's just um, putting aside my own nostalgia for that cartoon. The reason why I'm like this one should definitely make it in is just because uh, as far as I can think of, that's probably the first instance of like a Spider Verse because they actually had a whole story arc in that show where it
I
was like a bunch of different Spider-Man. So it's like,
exactly
if you're gonna do Spider Verse, you gotta have at least the first person to do it.
to do
Again,
it.
maybe I'm wrong, but that's as far as I know the farthest back that goes.
Well, no,
Um,
and you would be right because the comic Spider Verse, I think, only went back to 2014, 2015.
yeah, it was within like the yeah about a decade ago or a
More or
little
less, yeah.
less.
And then yeah, going back to that, yeah, that was you did have those different versions of Peter where I think even one he sort of said, "Oh, I'm just an actor who plays Spider-Man in a movie."
Yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel. I am hoping that we get a bunch of creative stuff with it, but I don't know. I mean,
Okay. I think as long as they still have more the same creative team of the three directors, Lord, Miller, and whoever, and the other people that were in the writing room, I think it should be fine. I know I'm sure Sony at this point is also hopefully they don't try and interfere too much with it, because seeing as they really let them do what they wanted to do with the initial Spider-Verse movie, it would make no sense to try and mess with the formula now.
exactly.
Just let them do their thing. You've seen what happened the first time. Just let them do their thing. Let them figure it out, and hopefully from there, I'm pretty confident it's going to be just as good. I just wonder whether it's going to be better or not. Like I said, unfortunately, it's still too early to tell. We just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely something where I'm like, I just hope it's good. I don't really need it to be better. I just need it to be entertaining. That's all that really matters to me.
No, of course.
But yeah, with this one, the original Into the Spider Verse, it's just a fantastic movie. Uh, that it's one of the few movies to win the best animated picture award. That isn't Disney is definitely not surprising given just how creative it is. Like it kind of would have been a shame had it not even been nominated, which could have
No,
always
which would
happened.
have no exactly. It's never a guarantee with that, because I mean there are years where you have like, how does this win? But this didn't even get nominated, regardless of whether it's animation, documentary, or one of the other features. It just
Yeah, and part of why I do love that it won, aside from it being a good movie, is that I've noticed that there's been more animated movies since that uh, have been more creative in their animation style. Like not to the point of this, but I've seen more at least try to branch out from the usual Pixar style. So I don't know. That's definitely all I'm glad for.
well, I think we'll definitely see more of that, because again, not to say that it's on a downtrend. I mean, it has definitely taken, hit more like traditional animation styles have it. You don't really see them as much nowadays. So I think most people now associate them with with DC's other side, with which is their animated movies.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that they're not bad. It's just their typical release to straight to release. The straight to release video. I mean, they've had some good ones throughout. I think probably, at least in my opinion, the best one of those that they've done was The Killing Joke, which, aside from one change, is more or less faithful to its adaptation. But yeah, like I said, they have become more experimental, which they needed to, because I think pretty much since what was it, like the mid 2000s, we've seen more just CGI.
Yeah, it's just like the mid 2000s.
Yeah, which it's not a bad thing. It's just, I guess there's been improvements in it. I mean, you can obviously compare that to, look at the Toy Story movies.
Yeah.
The initial one, they all look the same, whereas now they had, the technology is advanced, so they can make little things look different, where, they don't all look like, where, Andy doesn't look like he's completely made of the same plastic as Woody.
Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely see there's more of a skin texture there instead of...
Exactly, and which is why, again, going to Spider-Verse, I love it because it's a blend of, obviously, you see the CGI as well as the hand-drawn elements in there as well, with the textures of the characters, especially on the up-close shots, that you can really notice all that.
I'll always have a preference for 2D animation, but I do appreciate seeing CG kind of break away from just doing like the typical mold of let's just have it look like a Pixar movie. So I don't know. That's pretty much what I love on this.
No, and again, like I said, it's visually pleasing, just because it is so completely different. Like we mentioned earlier, it's still crazy to think that this is the first animated superhero movie to go the route of being presented like a comic book. I mean, the fact that they even, like we mentioned, that they have the dot textures, and they even have the thought bubbles and the whole, blam, wham, all that.
Even the movement, because I know when it comes to like I remember they mentioned like, okay, pay attention to how Miles moves and pay attention to how Peter B moves. You'll notice that Peter B, moves very fluid. Like, he's what they call in the animation industry, he's animated on ones, whereas Miles is animated on twos, which is basically a way to kind of save, like pretty much save money, or to like in the case of this movie, it makes Miles look more stiff when it comes to doing his actions, because he's new to the Spider-Man role, whereas Peter B has been there for who knows how long. So it's like, okay, he already has that handled.
Exactly, which you do really know. I'm glad you brought that up, because you do really notice that when when Miles is first learning to swing.
Yeah.
Like, you do see that where for Peter, he tells him, just don't think about it, which for somebody that does have that experience, that you don't have to think about it. But for somebody new, whether it's, learning to ride a bike, drive a car, whatever, you are thinking about everything.
Exactly.
In some cases, you're even overthinking, which can lead to what happened to Miles, where he ends up, shooting onto the twig instead of a branch of the tree itself.
With that out of the way, I don't know, is there anything else that you wanted to add to this? I feel like I've said pretty much everything.
I think we've pretty much covered it. But I mean, I'll say it again. Amazing film, great, story, cast, direction, probably one of the best scored movies, of the time. Now since when it came out, all that. I know a lot of people would rank this as the best Marvel movie ever. I personally wouldn't go that far. I would say it's definitely, for me at least, it is, as far as like the best Spider-Man. For me, it's a three-way tie between Spider-Verse, Homecoming, and the original Sam Raimi. But regardless, if you haven't seen it, watch it. If you have, watch it again.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on that front. I don't know if I would call it the best Marvel movie, best Spider-Man movie. I'm willing to at least let that go. I
It's
mean,
yeah, like I said, I know a lot of people feel different, but at least for me, those three films right now are very hard to top. Like I said, it changed those three. It changed the order changes,
yeah,
depending on how I feel about that particular movie. But for the most part, it is in that it's in those top three with those other two.
yeah,
You can't hate the original.
yeah. Honestly, it's a masterpiece, just an amazing movie, and it's one that just needs to be watched again and again.
Exactly.
Not just because of the details that they add in, but just because it's really that good. So yeah, that's pretty much my thought on it. It's an amazing movie. So yeah, just closing this off, just want to say thank you for listening. This has been Octaviano Macias. I don't know if you want to plug anything in, like if you got anything to promote.
Not really. Just like, thank you for having me on this one. It's been fun. Hopefully we can do this again. Just let me know.
Oh yeah, sure.
Anything else you want to, we'll be down to do this again. And to everybody listening, keep listening, keep waiting, and we will see you guys soon.
Sometimes I let matches burn down to my fingertips just to feel something, anything. Oh.
Hey, just wanted to say thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. Comment below if you had any thoughts on this. And if you want to support me even more, there's always the option of Patreon. Yes, I have a Patreon. Patreon would be a great way to help me grow this channel, as it's a great way to get equipment, a great way to let me know what you guys like, and it's a great way to help me financially. Just saying, the more I have on Patreon, the more time I'll have for these videos. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.